December 1942. A cold wind sweeps across a German airfield at Rechlin, north of Berlin. Frost clings to the wings of a massive bomber unlike any the Luftwaffe crews have ever seen. Under the pale winter sun, the shape of the aircraft is unmistakable. A Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, its olive drab skin now bearing black crosses hastily painted over American stars. A group of Luftwaffe officers stands in silence, their breath rising in white clouds. Engineers circle the aircraft, studying every inch, the plexiglass nose turret, the staggered waist guns, the massive tail assembly. To them, this is not just a captured enemy machine. It is a trophy, a mystery, and perhaps a key to understanding why their own fighters return torn and burning from daylight raids. As the engines cough to life, the thunder of 4 Wright Cyclone engines rolls across the tarmac. The ground trembles. The German test pilot tightens his harness, eyes fixed on the horizon. Around him, officers watch with an almost reverent unease. They have flown countless aircraft, Messerschmitts, Heinkels, Dorniers, but never something quite like this. The B-17 begins to move, and history records the moment when German hands took control of an American fortress. Its flight would reveal not weakness, but astonishment. By 1942, the skies over Europe had become a battlefield unlike any in history. The Luftwaffe, once supreme, had extended its reach across the continent, dominating France, Poland, and the Low Countries. Yet, the tides of war were shifting. The United States, newly drawn into the conflict, was pouring men, machines, and industrial might into the European theater. Among its most formidable contributions was the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, a heavy bomber designed not just to strike, but to survive. The B-17 was a machine of paradox. Delicate in appearance, with its long, slender wings and a nose that seemed almost fragile, it concealed armor, firepower, and endurance that defied expectations. For powerful radar, 1820 Cyclone engines could lift a bomb load of up to 8,000 pounds on shorter missions, while the aircraft's rugged frame could absorb hits that would destroy almost any other plane. Its defensive armament, up to 13.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, created overlapping fields of fire, earning it the nickname Flying Fortress among its crews and eventually among the Germans who faced it over the skies of Europe. Daylight bombing raids over occupied Europe were a gamble. American crews, inexperienced and young, faced the unrelenting fire of Luftwaffe fighters, flak batteries, and the merciless winter winds. Losses were severe. The famed Schweinfurt, Regensburg raids of August 1943 would later demonstrate the vulnerability of even these indestructible machines. Yet the B-17 persisted. Pilots spoke in hushed tones of how one could return home riddled with holes, engines smoking, guns jammed, yet still land on its own wheels. For the Luftwaffe, these raids were both infuriating and instructive. Every bomber lost was a lesson, in tactics, in firepower, in resilience. German pilots described them with begrudging admiration. They were machines built not merely for destruction, but for survival in the face of overwhelming odds. In the spring and summer of 1942, as the Allies intensified their strategic bombing campaign, the Luftwaffe found itself chasing shadows across northern France and the Low Countries, often engaging B-17 formations far larger and more coordinated than anything seen before. It was during one such raid over Brest, a vital port in Brittany, that the Germans would unexpectedly acquire one of these formidable aircraft intact. On a cold December morning in 1942, a B-17F of the 303rd Bomb Group, its serial number 41 to 24,585, limped back from a raid, damaged, yet still flyable. Navigational errors and mechanical failures forced it to land on German-held territory rather than return to England. Its crew, bewildered, surrendered without a fight. For the Germans, this was more than a prize. It was an unprecedented opportunity. At Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's secret testing and evaluation airfield, engineers and test pilots were already familiar with experimental aircraft, prototypes, and captured enemy machines. Yet the B-17 was different. It was not a sleek fighter, nor a lightly armored reconnaissance plane. It was an industrial marvel, a fortress that carried the weight of America's burgeoning war machine. Detailed reports described its resilience, the ability to sustain multiple hits to the fuselage, wings, and engines while remaining airborne, the redundancy of its control surfaces, the effectiveness of its multiple gun positions, and the unusual discipline required of its crews to maintain defensive formations in the skies over hostile territory. In the months that followed, the captured aircraft would become the centerpiece of Luftwaffe study. Engineers cataloged its construction methods. Armor thickness was measured, gun fields of fire were mapped, and the limitations of its defensive systems were analyzed. Pilots took turns flying it, attempting maneuvers that might reveal its weaknesses, its quirks, or its vulnerabilities. Each test flight confirmed one inescapable truth. The B-17 was not merely a bomber. It was a fortress in the sky, capable of imposing its will even on those trained to dominate the air. This moment, the acquisition of a functioning B-17, would ripple through the Luftwaffe. The aircraft would be tested, dissected, and even flown against German fighters in mock dogfights. Every barrel of its Browning guns, every reinforced bulkhead, every engine output figure was meticulously recorded. Officers and pilots would later confess that they had never encountered defensive firepower like it. And yet, even with such knowledge, the lessons of the flying fortress would arrive too late to reverse the growing imbalance of the air war. The captured B-17, nicknamed Wolf Hound by its German evaluators, was carefully transported to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier testing facility. Situated amidst dense pine forests and bordered by frozen lakes, the airfield was a place where aircraft were not only tested but dissected, studied, and sometimes destroyed in controlled experiments. Here, German engineers prided themselves on reverse engineering enemy technology, seeking weaknesses that could be exploited in combat. Yet Wolfhound presented a puzzle unlike any they had faced before. Mechanically, the bomber was straightforward yet robust. Its 4 Wright Cyclone engines were reliable under duress, each capable of producing 1,200 horsepower. The fuselage was reinforced with light armor at key points, the nose, cockpit, and gunner positions. This armor, while not impervious to the Luftwaffe's 20mm or 30mm cannon, allowed the aircraft to endure punishment that would have destroyed other bombers. Every detail, from its hydraulics to its electrical wiring, revealed an engineering philosophy that valued survivability above elegance. German engineers meticulously cataloged these details, taking photographs, diagrams, and notes that would later inform Luftwaffe tactical manuals. Yet the true marvel of the B-17 lay not in its mechanical parts, but in its design as a defensive platform. The aircraft featured multiple gun positions, 2 in the nose, 2 in the tail, a dorsal turret, a ventral turret, and waist positions on either side. The overlapping fields of fire created zones where enemy fighters could be engaged from almost any angle. German pilots who would later fly Wolf Hound were astonished by this layout. The aircraft did not simply rely on speed or maneuverability. It relied on sheer, sustained firepower to defend itself. Every test flight confirmed that a single B-17, if crewed efficiently and flying in formation, could punish attacking fighters far beyond what the Luftwaffe had anticipated. The human element was equally significant. German officers noted the coordination required of American crews. Each gunner had a clearly defined sector, and communication between positions was constant. Even when damaged, the crew could maintain formation and defensive fire. This discipline, a combination of rigorous training and industrial design, was a revelation to German evaluators. Observers wrote that it was as though the aircraft itself had been built to fight back, a moving fortress capable of punishing aggressors relentlessly. Operationally, the acquisition of Wolfhound coincided with a turning point in the air war over Europe. The United States 8th Air Force was increasing its bombing campaigns over German-occupied France and the Ruhr industrial region. Early daylight raids had exposed the vulnerabilities of unescorted bombers, resulting in catastrophic losses. The Luftwaffe, confident in its fighters but aware of the heavy losses inflicted by these flying fortresses, saw the captured aircraft as a potential solution, a template for understanding how to attack and destroy formations more effectively. During test flights, Luftwaffe pilots engaged the B-17 in mock attacks using Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf Fw 190s. Each sortie was meticulously documented. Pilots found that conventional tactics, head-on dives, tail attacks, or slashing passes, carried extreme risk. Even the smallest miscalculation exposed the attacker to a torrent of machine gun fire. In reports later submitted to command, one German officer admitted, almost incredulously, that he had never seen defensive firepower like this, and that the bomber could repel multiple fighters without apparent distress. These evaluations would shape Luftwaffe doctrine in the months that followed, influencing how fighters were deployed, how attack angles were chosen, and how Luftwaffe pilots approached daylight interception missions. Yet, despite the technical fascination and operational insights, the capture of Wolf Hound offered no decisive advantage. Germany's industrial output could not replicate the mass production capabilities of the United States. Even with the knowledge gained from the test flights, Luftwaffe fighters remained vulnerable to the sheer numbers and resilience of Allied bomber formations. The evaluations became a study in respect and frustration. Respect for the engineering brilliance of the B-17 and frustration at the limits of German strategic resources. By the end of 1943, Wolfhound had completed dozens of test flights. Every measurement, every pilot report, and every observation was carefully archived. These records would later provide historians with a rare window into how the Luftwaffe perceived the B-17, not merely as an enemy aircraft, but as a technological benchmark that demanded admiration and fear. The aircraft, more than a machine, had become a symbol of the industrial and human resolve that the Germans could neither destroy nor duplicate. The stage was now set to examine the B-17 from multiple perspectives: the human, the tactical, and the technological. Each angle would reveal not only the machine's capabilities, but also the profound effect it had on those who flew it and those who opposed it. The first and most immediate angle through which the B-17 impressed the Luftwaffe was technological. For German engineers and pilots accustomed to sleek, agile fighters, the Flying Fortress represented a completely different philosophy of aerial warfare. Its 4 engines, each producing 1,200 horsepower, offered not only raw power but redundancy. A single engine could fail, and the aircraft would still climb and maneuver. The fuselage, reinforced at critical points, absorbed damage that would have grounded any other bomber. The German engineers meticulously documented the B-17's internal structure, the placement of bulkheads, the routing of hydraulic lines, and the clever integration of fuel tanks into the wings to minimize fire risk. The defensive armament was equally revolutionary. While the Luftwaffe relied on concentrated firepower from a few well-placed fighters, the B-17 distributed it across multiple overlapping positions. Waist gunners, dorsal and ventral turrets, and the tail and nose guns created a nearly 360-degree protective envelope. German pilots who flew mock attacks discovered that even a single misjudged approach could result in a fusillade of bullets across their wings or fuselage. Observers described it as a moving fortress of lead, a flying system designed to punish any attacker, regardless of skill. Yet technology alone did not define the B-17's effectiveness. Its operational design required disciplined crews. The Luftwaffe observed that each gunner had a dedicated field of fire, and that coordinated communication allowed them to cover blind spots effectively. This cohesion, combined with the aircraft's armored resilience, made attacks perilous. Reports noted that even experienced German pilots found it almost impossible to disable the bomber without significant risk of loss. Every sortie into mock combat underscored the precision and coordination that made the Flying Fortress a formidable adversary. The second angle is the Luftwaffe's perspective on its captured prize. Pilots and officers approached the B-17 with a mixture of professional curiosity and tactical apprehension. For many, it was a test of ego and skill. Could a seasoned Luftwaffe pilot find a weakness in an aircraft that seemed impervious to conventional attacks? The initial flights quickly dispelled illusions of invincibility. The Flying Fortress required respect. It demanded caution and tactical innovation. German officers would later write that the experience reshaped their understanding of bomber design, highlighting a balance between speed, defensive firepower, and structural durability that the Luftwaffe had not fully appreciated before. From a leadership perspective, the tests of Wolf Hound also illuminated the importance of industrial capacity and strategic foresight. While the aircraft impressed the Germans, it also highlighted a painful truth. Even with detailed knowledge of its strengths and vulnerabilities, the Luftwaffe lacked the production capacity to build anything comparable. This created a strategic gap. The Allies, particularly the United States, could produce hundreds of B-17s in the time it would take Germany to build a few experimental heavy bombers. German commanders began to recognize that technology alone could not secure air superiority. The human and industrial elements were equally critical. The human angle was no less significant. Pilots flying the captured B-17 reported a strange mix of awe and frustration. The bomber's stability in the air, even under extreme maneuvers, was remarkable. A single pilot could almost feel the aircraft absorbing and compensating for damage, a testament to its engineering. At the same time, German gunners practicing against the bomber quickly understood the deadly efficiency of its defensive armament. One officer's journal noted, "I felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on me. Each gun trained, each line of fire exact. To attack it was to invite certain harm." These human experiences left a lasting impression on the Luftwaffe, shaping both doctrine and morale. Another angle was strategic. German intelligence realized that understanding the B-17's design and capabilities could inform more effective interception tactics. Detailed mock combat exercises revealed weaknesses, blind spots in the nose and tail during certain maneuvers, vulnerability when isolated from formations, and the limits of its engines under sustained fire. These observations were incorporated into Luftwaffe tactical manuals, influencing the way fighters engaged Allied formations. Yet, even with this insight, German pilots faced a new reality. The B-17's combination of defensive firepower, durability, and formation discipline made daylight raids increasingly hazardous. The final element of Section 1 is the moral dimension. There was a quiet respect among the Luftwaffe officers for the American crews, who risked their lives flying these fortresses into hostile skies. Observing the B-17 in action, even in test scenarios, revealed not only the machine's capability, but the human determination embedded within its operation. This perspective would linger in reports, journals, and memoirs, a subtle acknowledgement that technological superiority was inseparable from human courage and discipline. Together, these angles, technological, tactical, leadership, human, strategic, and moral, painted a comprehensive picture of the flying fortress. The aircraft was no longer merely a captured enemy plane. It had become a benchmark, a challenge, and a lesson in the evolving dynamics of aerial warfare. The human experience of flying or facing the B-17 was, for many Luftwaffe officers, unlike anything they had encountered before. Pilots accustomed to the agility of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs were suddenly confronted with a machine that demanded both respect and caution. Those selected to test fly Wolf Hound reported a mixture of awe and frustration. The bomber's flight characteristics were surprisingly forgiving. Despite its enormous size and weight, it could absorb abrupt maneuvers, maintain altitude under duress, and remain remarkably stable even when engines were partially disabled. One test pilot described the sensation as steering a cathedral through the clouds, a flying vessel that seemed alive with resilience. Yet the stability of the B-17 was inseparable from the deadly precision of its defensive firepower. During mock dogfights, German pilots quickly realized that a single miscalculation could be catastrophic. Every turret, waist gun, and tail position created overlapping zones of danger. Attacking the bomber required careful coordination, precise timing, and nerves of steel. Accounts from these test flights describe a mix of exhilaration and fear. Pilots knew that a successful engagement could yield valuable data, but failure could result in damage or even a forced bailout. In this respect, the Flying Fortress was as much a teacher as it was a target, compelling German pilots to refine tactics and confront the limitations of conventional approaches. From a strategic perspective, the captured B-17 provided insights into the broader air war. German command had long struggled to counter the growing Allied daylight bombing campaigns. Interceptions were often costly, Luftwaffe fighters risked being shredded by overlapping gunfire, and even experienced squadrons suffered losses. Studying the B-17 revealed why American bombing formations were so difficult to break. The aircraft's durability, firepower, and formation discipline meant that single or even double fighter attacks were often insufficient. The Germans documented these vulnerabilities, for instance, the risk of head-on approaches and the need to isolate bombers from their formations, and adjusted operational doctrine accordingly. Even with these insights, however, the sheer volume of American aircraft meant that tactical improvements could not fully stem the tide. Leadership analysis further deepened the understanding of the flying fortress significance. Luftwaffe officers recognized that the bomber's design reflected not only technological sophistication, but also a philosophy of combined industrial and human effort. American leadership emphasized production, training, and redundancy. A loss in one squadron could be replaced by another. A damaged plane could be repaired. A young crew, well-trained, could operate with deadly efficiency. German leaders acknowledged that even perfect tactical execution could not compensate for the Allies' superior numbers and logistics. The B-17 became a symbol of the operational and organizational might of the United States, a stark contrast to the increasingly strained Luftwaffe. Another crucial human dimension emerged from the perspective of the engineers and technicians. For them, Wolfhound was both a marvel and a puzzle. Every engine, hydraulic system, and armor panel offered insight into American construction methods. Yet the aircraft also highlighted the limits of German industry. Replicating the bomber's production quality, speed, and resilience was impossible under wartime constraints. Engineers marveled at the redundancy built into each system. Multiple backup controls, self-sealing fuel tanks, and reinforced frames designed to survive punishment. Observing the bomber in flight, they began to understand why German tactics against formations often resulted in heavy losses, and why the Allies could continue raids even after sustaining significant damage. The moral and psychological impact of the B-17 cannot be understated. German pilots and officers admitted a reluctant admiration for the bravery of American crews who flew these fortresses into flak-filled skies, often without fighter escort. Witnessing the aircraft's defensive capabilities firsthand reinforced the notion that technological sophistication and human courage were intertwined. The flying fortress embodied a philosophy of aerial combat that prioritized survival through discipline, coordination, and resilience, traits that demanded respect even from an enemy. Finally, the strategic lessons of the captured B-17 extended beyond immediate combat. The evaluations informed Luftwaffe decisions on fighter deployment, attack angles, and engagement strategies. Yet they also served as a sobering reminder. Technological insight alone could not change the outcome of the air war. The Allies' industrial might and ability to replace losses far outpaced Germany's capacity. The B-17 was not just a machine. It was a testament to a system in which design, production, and human training were inseparable. Through these angles, human experience, strategic assessment, leadership insight, and moral reflection, the Flying Fortress emerged not merely as an aircraft, but as a benchmark of aerial warfare. German officers had studied its every component, flown it in mock engagements, and marveled at its defenses. Yet the lesson was clear. The B-17 was a machine that demanded respect, ingenuity, and adaptation. And it was this realization that would set the stage for the coming confrontation, the intense, high-stakes encounters in the skies, where the true power of the Flying Fortress would be revealed. It was early January 1943 when the Luftwaffe conducted one of its most meticulous test flights of the captured B-17, Wolfhound. The morning air over Rechlin was sharp and clear, the frost glinting along the edges of the runway. German test pilots, some of the most experienced in the Luftwaffe, had prepared meticulously. Engineers had checked every bolt, every hydraulic line, and every turret. This flight would not only push the bomber to its limits, but measure its true defensive capabilities against their own fighters. At precisely 9:30, the four Wright Cyclone engines roared to life. The ground trembled beneath the immense fuselage as the Flying Fortress taxied, its massive wings cutting through the cold morning mist. Observers watched as the aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky.
The German pilots assigned to simulate enemy attacks climbed into their Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf FW 190s, engines screaming as they ascended to intercept. The sky became a controlled battlefield, a laboratory of air combat. From the cockpit of the B-17, the view was expansive and commanding. The German pilot felt the aircraft respond smoothly, despite the weight of its structure and payload. Initial maneuvers were simple: turns, climbs, and descents. Yet even these revealed the bomber's resilience. The aircraft absorbed sharp banking and sudden engine, throttling with minimal stress, maintaining stability that impressed even the most experienced German aviators. Observers on the ground noted the calm precision of the pilot, adjusting to the bomber's massive inertia while keeping a steady course. The true test began when the Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs approached. Standard attack patterns, head-on dives, tail pursuits, and slashing side passes were executed with precision. Yet each attempt met with unexpected resistance. As the fighters closed, the defensive gunners aboard the B-17 opened fire. Twin .50 caliber machine guns erupted from the nose, waist, and tail positions. The sky seemed to fill with tracer lines, intersecting and converging in deadly corridors. German pilots reported being caught off guard. Even well-rehearsed attack runs were disrupted by overlapping fields of fire that left little room for error. In one striking maneuver, a Messerschmitt attempted a classic tail run, closing in from the rear at 320 kilometers per hour. The tail guns, however, tracked smoothly, forcing the attacker into evasive action. Another Focke-Wulf, approaching from above and behind, found itself in a crossfire from both dorsal and tail turrets. One officer later recalled in his log, "I had trained for years against bombers, but this was unlike anything I had imagined. Every angle threatened us." Each successive approach revealed the same lesson. Attacking a B-17 demanded more than skill. It required strategy, coordination, and courage. As the test progressed, engineers monitored performance. The bomber's engines remained steady despite prolonged high-throttle maneuvers, its control surfaces responsive even under simulated damage conditions. Fuel consumption, wing stress, and maneuver limits were measured in real time. Damage simulation exercises were conducted, firing blanks at sections of the fuselage to evaluate armor resilience. Remarkably, the aircraft maintained operational integrity, absorbing hits without catastrophic failure. Observers began to note a repeated pattern. The B-17 was not merely surviving these attacks, it was dominating the engagement. The Luftwaffe's mock combat exercises yielded a startling revelation. Not only could the flying fortress endure extreme stress, but its defensive firepower effectively neutralized multiple attacking fighters. German reports stated that even a squadron of experienced pilots found themselves outmatched by the coordination of gun positions and the durability of the aircraft. For officers who had flown against Allied bombers over France, the implications were sobering. Here was a single machine that could impose fear and damage upon their most skilled pilots, a tangible demonstration of why Allied bombing raids continued to inflict heavy losses despite German efforts. The climax of the flight came with a controlled simulation of a formation attack. Two B-17s, one acting as a decoy, executed maneuvers to simulate standard Allied formation tactics. German fighters engaged, attempting to isolate one aircraft. The results were instructive and alarming. Attackers were repelled, outmaneuvered not by speed, but by overlapping fire and formation discipline. Officers observed that the combination of crew coordination, defensive armament, and structural resilience made the flying fortress more than a bomber. It was a fortress in every sense of the word. By the time the aircraft landed, the mood among the Luftwaffe personnel was a mixture of awe, respect, and unease. Pilots and engineers debriefed extensively, noting every observation, every point of vulnerability, and every lesson learned. Reports concluded that no conventional attack strategy could easily overcome the B-17 without incurring significant risk. One German officer's private journal reflected the sentiment. "We have met a machine that is not simply aircraft, but a lesson in engineering, in discipline, and in the terrifying effectiveness of defensive firepower." The stage was set for the broader implications of these revelations.
The captured B-17 had provided not only technical data, but a moment of clarity. The Allies' air strategy, built around resilience, firepower, and disciplined crews, was a challenge that Germany could not ignore. What followed next would test the Luftwaffe's ability to adapt and reveal the limits of even their most advanced tactics. Following the initial test flights of Wolfhound, the Luftwaffe intensified its evaluation program. Engineers and pilots alike were determined to extract every insight from this captured flying fortress. Over the next several weeks, a series of increasingly complex exercises were conducted. These flights were no longer mere tests of performance. They had become tactical simulations designed to identify vulnerabilities and refine engagement strategies. German pilots approached each sortie with caution, knowing that their enemy, even a captured aircraft, could inflict serious damage. Head-on attacks, long the standard tactic against Allied bombers, were now scrutinized under a new lens. Observers noted that the B-17's nose guns, combined with precise dorsal coverage, made frontal approaches particularly perilous. Tail attacks, once considered effective, were complicated by a highly effective tail turret and overlapping waist gunfire. Side attacks required extreme timing to avoid intersecting fields of fire. Every maneuver highlighted a simple truth. Attacking a flying fortress demanded not just bravery, but exacting calculation. The results of these exercises forced a fundamental reconsideration of Luftwaffe tactics. German officers compiled detailed reports recommending coordinated multi-angle attacks and emphasizing the importance of exploiting any formation gaps. Tactics previously taught in fighter schools, aggressive head-on dives, isolated pursuits, and rapid slashing passes, were reconsidered or abandoned. Training manuals began to include lessons derived from the flying fortress, emphasizing caution and reconnaissance before engagement. The B-17, it seemed, had rewritten the rules of air combat. Perhaps the most striking revelation was the psychological impact on Luftwaffe pilots. Experienced aviators, who had once taken Allied bombers lightly, found themselves awed and, at times, intimidated. Accounts describe a deep respect for both the aircraft and the crews who operated it. Pilots noted that even in mock engagements, a single misjudgment could lead to near disaster. One pilot's report stated, "We had trained for years to intercept bombers, but this machine, it commands respect. Its defenses are relentless, its resilience extraordinary. To attack it is to court destruction." This acknowledgement of fear and respect marked a rare admission of admiration for enemy engineering within the German Air Force. The captured B-17 also provided insights into Allied operational philosophy. German officers observed that the aircraft was designed not for speed or maneuverability alone, but for sustained combat and survival. Crew coordination was integral. Gunners were trained to cover each other's blind spots, and formations were disciplined to maximize mutual protection. Engineers noted the redundancy of critical systems. Multiple hydraulic lines, dual control cables, and self-sealing fuel tanks allowed the aircraft to endure damage that would disable any other bomber. Each observation reinforced the idea that the flying fortress was more than the sum of its parts. It was a system designed to survive, adapt, and fight back. Tactical simulations revealed a specific vulnerability: isolation. While the B-17 excelled in formation, a lone aircraft, separated from its squadron, became markedly more susceptible to attack. German officers incorporated this into their tactical thinking, emphasizing disruption of formations as a key objective. Yet even in isolation, the aircraft's overlapping fire zones remained deadly, and pilots found that multiple aircraft were still required to ensure a successful interception. The lessons were clear: quantity, coordination, and patience were essential, but so too was the understanding that attacking such an aircraft carried inherent risk. The evaluations also affected Luftwaffe leadership at a strategic level. Commanders recognized that even with detailed knowledge of the B-17, German industry could not replicate the aircraft's durability or production scale. The exercise highlighted a growing strategic imbalance. The Allies could replace losses rapidly, train new crews, and continue daylight bombing campaigns with ever-increasing sophistication. The captured bomber, while invaluable as a teaching tool,
underscored the limitations of German resources in a war increasingly defined by industrial output and logistical capacity. By the conclusion of the program, Luftwaffe officers offered a unanimous assessment. They had never encountered defensive firepower like that of the Flying Fortress. Reports praised the aircraft's stability, firepower, and crew coordination, noting that the B-17 represented a benchmark in strategic bombing design. The lessons learned influenced fighter deployment, interception tactics, and engagement philosophy. But they also revealed an uncomfortable truth. German pilots could adapt, but they could not match the combination of engineering excellence, crew discipline, and industrial strength embodied in the B-17. The Wolfhound tests closed with a final series of mock missions. Pilots maneuvered against the Flying Fortress. Engineers noted every response, and officers meticulously documented outcomes. When the engines finally fell silent, and the aircraft was secured on the frost-covered tarmac, a quiet acknowledgement passed among the Luftwaffe personnel. They had faced a machine that challenged everything they had known about aerial warfare. The Flying Fortress had proven itself not just as a bomber, but as a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and the deadly precision of coordinated human effort. The revelations from these flights would reverberate through the remainder of the air war. German tactical manuals were revised, fighter strategies adjusted, and every officer who had flown Wolfhound carried the memory of its defensive power into future engagements. Yet even with this knowledge, the Allies' industrial capacity and strategic coordination continued to tip the balance in the skies over Europe. The captured B-17 had revealed the limits of adaptation and the inescapable reality of facing an opponent whose combination of technology, discipline, and production power was unmatched. By mid-1943, the intensive test program of Wolfhound had concluded, leaving the Luftwaffe with detailed technical reports and tactical analyses. The captured B-17 had been dissected, studied, and flown repeatedly, revealing both its formidable strengths and the limited vulnerabilities that could, in theory, be exploited. Yet, despite these insights, the broader air war had already moved beyond the reach of individual aircraft evaluations. Allied bombing raids were increasing in scale and precision, and the lessons learned at Rechlin would serve more as guidance than as a decisive countermeasure. Wolfhound itself met a quiet and unremarkable end, a fate shared by many captured enemy aircraft. Stationed at Rechlin under guarded conditions, it remained a focal point for testing until late 1943, when Allied intelligence and air raids began to threaten German facilities. Bombing of Luftwaffe airfields in northern Germany, including Rechlin, rendered the continued use of such test aircraft impractical. Historical records indicate that Wolfhound was either destroyed during an air raid or dismantled to prevent its recapture. Its components, however, continued to inform Luftwaffe engineers for months after its disappearance, embedded in technical manuals and internal reports. The human legacy of the Flying Fortress evaluation was perhaps more profound than the physical one. Luftwaffe pilots and officers carried the memory of its defensive capabilities into combat operations. They had witnessed firsthand the effectiveness of overlapping machine gun fire, the stability of the aircraft under extreme stress, and the disciplined coordination of American crews. These observations reshaped training and engagement philosophy. Fighter pilots were instructed to attack in coordinated groups, exploit blind spots, and avoid isolated engagements. Yet, even with these tactical refinements, the experience underscored a sobering reality. Facing formations of B-17s in daylight raids remained a perilous undertaking. Reports filed by test pilots emphasized a recurring theme: admiration mixed with respect. One officer wrote in his journal that the Flying Fortress demands more than skill. It demands a form of courage born from understanding the danger it represents. German engineers, too, reflected on the lessons embedded in the aircraft's construction. Redundancy, armor placement, and crew coordination combined to create a bomber that could survive what would destroy any conventional aircraft. These lessons would influence not only tactical thinking, but also the design philosophy of later German aircraft, particularly the push toward heavier fighters and long-range interceptors. Strategically, the evaluation of Wolfhound highlighted the growing imbalance in the air war. Germany could study, adapt, and innovate,
but it could not match the industrial scale of the United States. The Allies could replace losses at a rate Germany could not hope to match, and the B-17, mass-produced, resilient, and coordinated, embodied this advantage. Even as the Luftwaffe integrated insights from the captured aircraft into doctrine, it became clear that incremental improvements could not overcome the sheer weight of Allied numbers and resources. The Flying Fortress thus became a symbol, a benchmark of what industrialized air power could achieve when combined with disciplined crews. In broader terms, the fate of Wolfhound served as a microcosm of the war in the air, a moment of intense study, admiration, and tactical revelation, ultimately overtaken by the relentless momentum of strategic reality. While the Luftwaffe learned much from the aircraft's capabilities, the insights could not halt the accelerating pace of Allied operations. By the time of the raids on the Ruhr and later Berlin, the lessons derived from the Flying Fortress were operationally useful but strategically insufficient. The captured B-17 had exposed both the potential and the limitations of German adaptation. In mock combat, it had dominated, revealing vulnerabilities in existing tactics and forcing adjustments. Yet in the larger picture, it highlighted a growing disparity. German skill and knowledge could confront American ingenuity and bravery, but it could not match American production, logistics, and the sheer numerical advantage. The Flying Fortress had taught the Luftwaffe respect for the aircraft, for its crews, and for the industrial and human systems that produced it. And in doing so, it had foreshadowed the mounting challenges Germany would face in the skies over Europe. The story of Wolfhound and of the captured Flying Fortress was both a triumph of insight and a reminder of limits, a moment when the Luftwaffe glimpsed the full force of Allied resolve and knew it could not simply be overcome by tactics alone. The strategic implications of the captured B-17 extended far beyond Rechlin. Luftwaffe command analyzed every report, integrating lessons into operational doctrine. Fighter units were instructed to coordinate attacks in waves, exploiting gaps in bomber formations while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. Pilots were trained to avoid predictable approaches and to concentrate on disrupting squadron cohesion. Manuals were updated with precise data from Wolfhound, ranges of defensive fire, angles of vulnerability, and performance limits under various simulated damage conditions. In theory, these insights could increase interception success rates. Yet in practice, the sheer resilience and numbers of American bombers continued to challenge German forces. Even as doctrine evolved, the psychological impact on German aircrews persisted. Veterans who had flown the captured Flying Fortress carried a mixture of respect and apprehension into combat. Pilots recounted the immense firepower and stability of the aircraft, often using it as a benchmark for caution. Stories circulated in fighter wings of mock engagements against Wolfhound, emphasizing that overconfidence could be fatal. The aircraft had become a symbol, a lesson in humility, discipline, and the relentless danger posed by coordinated Allied formations. The operational value of these lessons became evident during the 1943 raids over the Ruhr and other industrial centers. Luftwaffe units applied coordinated attacks learned from the B-17 tests, aiming to concentrate fire and exploit momentary weaknesses in bomber formations. Despite these efforts, the heavy defensive firepower of the Flying Fortresses continued to exact a toll. German reports from engagements described formations riddled with tracer fire, often forcing retreat or limiting effectiveness. The data from Wolfhound improved tactical awareness, but it could not overcome the overwhelming combination of Allied industrial capacity, aircrew training, and strategic planning. From an engineering perspective, the insights gained influenced limited experimental projects within the Luftwaffe. Designers examined reinforced fuselage structures, improved turret coverage, and redundancy in control systems. The goal was to emulate, in part, the resilience and defensive capabilities of the B-17. However, Germany's industrial constraints and resource shortages made such adaptations largely aspirational. Unlike the United States, which could produce hundreds of bombers and replace losses rapidly, German innovation could not scale effectively. The Flying Fortress had thus exposed both tactical and strategic limitations. Morally and psychologically, the captured aircraft reinforced the reality that Allied air power was not simply a series of raids or sorties, but a testament to coordinated human effort and technological design. The Luftwaffe recognized that American crews were trained to operate under extreme conditions, to maintain discipline within tight formations, and to sustain missions despite severe damage. These observations deepened German respect for the adversary, even as it underscored the growing impossibility of halting the Allied bombing campaign. By late 1943, the lessons from Wolf Hound had become institutionalized. Tactical manuals referenced attack angles, blind spots, and engagement strategies derived from the captured bomber. Fighter pilot training incorporated simulations of B-17 defenses, and officers emphasized the importance of coordination and patience in combat. Yet the broader trajectory of the air war remained unchanged. American industrial output, combined with the mass deployment of flying fortresses, ensured that strategic bombing campaigns continued to grow in scale and intensity. The aftermath of the captured B-17 also highlighted a key lesson in warfare. Knowledge alone cannot substitute for resources and numbers. The Luftwaffe's detailed understanding of the aircraft, while impressive, could not counteract the systemic advantages of the Allies. The Flying Fortress had demonstrated that survivability, firepower, and crew discipline could shift the dynamics of combat, but it also revealed the limits of adaptation under constrained circumstances. Germany's inability to replicate these advantages on a large scale foreshadowed the mounting difficulties it would face in subsequent aerial engagements. Ultimately, the story of Wolfhound serves as a microcosm of the broader air war, a moment of technical revelation, tactical learning, and human awe, set against the unyielding momentum of strategic reality. The Flying Fortress had taught the Luftwaffe respect, caution, and ingenuity, but it also highlighted the stark imbalance between technological insight and industrial might. The lessons gained were profound, yet insufficient to change the outcome of a war increasingly defined by production, coordination, and endurance. The stage was now set for reflection, to consider what this encounter with a single, captured Flying Fortress meant for history, human ingenuity, and the evolution of aerial warfare. The story of Wolfhound, the captured B-17 Flying Fortress, is a testament to the convergence of human ingenuity, industrial might, and disciplined courage. In the frozen fields of Rechlin, German pilots and engineers witnessed an aircraft that defied conventional expectations, not through speed or maneuverability, but through resilience, coordination, and sheer defensive firepower. For a moment, the Luftwaffe encountered a machine that could withstand their best tactics, challenge their skill, and demand respect. Yet the significance of this episode extends beyond the technical marvel. It highlights the broader lessons of World War II, that warfare is as much about organization, production, and human discipline as it is about individual heroism or tactical brilliance. The Flying Fortress was more than steel and engines. It was the embodiment of a system in which training, engineering, and logistics were inseparable. It revealed to the Germans the limits of adaptation when faced with an adversary capable of replacing losses, innovating rapidly, and coordinating on an unprecedented scale. There's also a quiet human lesson in this story. The Luftwaffe's officers and pilots, even in the midst of war, acknowledged the courage and skill of their adversaries. They saw firsthand the deadly efficiency of crews operating under extreme conditions, maintaining discipline in the face of danger. The respect they recorded in logs and reports serves as a reminder that even in conflict, admiration for skill and resilience transcends sides. Wolfhound reminds us that technology alone does not define victory. It is the interplay of human determination, industrial capability, and tactical execution that shapes outcomes. The captured B-17, in its brief life under German evaluation, left a profound imprint on those who studied it, influencing doctrine, shaping perceptions, and revealing the immense challenge that Allied air power represented. In the end, the Flying Fortress is more than a historical artifact. It is a symbol of resilience, of ingenuity, and of the unyielding spirit of those who dared to fly into hostile skies. Its legacy endures, not only in the annals of aviation history, but in the lessons it imparts about the enduring relationship between human courage and technological innovation.